Al Jazeera Podcasts.
Today, rival Palestinian parties united against the backdrop of war.
All of these factions combined are saying that decision-making must be in Palestinian hands, not in the hands of Israel or of the international community. This is very important.
What could a China-brokered deal signed by Fatah and Hamas mean for a post-war Gaza and a future Palestinian state? I'm Kevin Hurton, and this is The Take.
The importance of this agreement is that it's seizing this idea of Palestinian self-determination and running with it and saying we're going to be the ones who choose our own leaders. My name is Deanna Buttu, and I'm a lawyer based in Palestine.
Deanna, it is great to have you here. We talk a lot about politics on this show, Israeli politics, certainly U.S. politics lately, but this is a chance to talk some Palestinian politics. 14 Palestinian groups, including Fatah and Hamas, signed this unity deal in China. Now, the deal aims to maintain Palestinian control over Gaza after the current Israeli assault presumably ends. And this is a pretty big deal, right? Because Fatah and Hamas have been at odds with each other for years. Before we get into the nuts and bolts of the agreement itself, I wonder if you can just start us off by outlining who the major players were here and what brought them to the table at this stage.
So since the last Palestinian elections, the last Palestinian general parliamentary elections were held in 2006. And at that time, Hamas ended up winning the vast majority of the seats. Now, also at that time, because Hamas won the vast majority of seats, there was pressure that was brought to bear on Fatah, which is another one of the large Palestinian factions, to not enter into any agreement to form a government with Hamas. And so there was pressure that was brought to bear on Mahmoud Abbas, who is not only the Palestinian president, but he's also the head of Fatah. That pressure came in the form of carrots by the United States and sticks. The carrots were things like promises of a resumed peace process, and the sticks were that the United States was going to withhold much-needed cash to the Palestinian Authority. And so as a result, since 2006, there has been a split between these two major political parties. But as you rightfully point out, it's not just these two factions. There's actually 14 major Palestinian factions. Now, since 2006, what we've seen is that for Palestinians, the number one issue that they have come forward in saying is that they want to see Palestinian unity. And there's an obvious reason for that, because when we're united, we're strong. When we're apart, we're not. And it's also absurd for many Palestinians when you step back, because none of these Palestinian factions say, wow, occupation is a good thing, settlements are a good thing, we don't want to return to our homes. They're all in agreement when it comes to the end result. The problem is the day-to-day governance. So since 2006, there have been a number of attempts to try to come up with a unity agreement. And in a number of different capitals around the world, the most recent was the one that we just saw this past week in Beijing.
So what does the agreement say exactly?
Well, there are a number of things that are in the agreement. First, the agreement says that they believe that Palestinians should be ruling over themselves. They believe in pushing for the ICJ opinion to be upheld.
The International Court of Justice has delivered an advisory opinion outlining that Israel's settlement of Palestinian territories are in breach of international law. Now, it had been
And the agreement also talks about coming together and having an interim government that will be able to lead, particularly in the Gaza Strip. And so you see that all of these factions combined are saying that decision-making must be in Palestinian hands, not in the hands of Israel or in the international community. This is very important.
Right. And you rightly pointed out that we've been here before. There have been attempts to have these type of agreements. But what do you think? Do you have confidence that this might hold where others failed?
I have to be optimistic only because to be pessimistic is to give in to what Israel ultimately wants, which is that Israel wants to ethnically cleanse Gaza. of Palestinians. He wants to ethnically cleanse all Palestinians, not just in Gaza. And I have to be optimistic because Palestinians have to be the ones who determine their future. It can't be in Israel's hands. It can't be in the hands of the United States. At the same time, it's a cautious optimism. And that cautious optimism stems from the fact that not only have we been here before, but the reason that we've been here so many times is because the United States has tried to thwart previous reconciliation attempts. This time around, also, there aren't really any carrots that they can provide. What are they going to say to Palestinians? We're going to relaunch a peace process, a failed peace process?
Right.
I think that the only way this time that it will stand in the way of a true agreement is if Mahmoud Abbas somehow believes that he is much more important than what Palestinians want. And that is my deep fear, is that he's afraid of being sidelined. And because he's afraid of being sidelined, he just might be the person who thwarts this agreement.
Is there anything you can read into the particulars of this deal that gives us some sort of clues what the PA might look like in a post-Abbas future?
Yes, and this is very important, is that unlike the previous Palestinian Authority, which really had as the center of it this idea that in order to attain freedom, we have to, as the people who are living under military occupation, give security to the occupier, it's just flipping international law on its head. This time around, that's not what they say. They are saying that we have a right to resist. And in addition to that, they're saying we have a right and we must hold Israel accountable. So unlike in the past where the emphasis has always been on the symbolism of Palestine, a declaration of a Palestinian state, but that doesn't mean anything. This time it's about really ending Israeli impunity and pushing to hold Israel accountable. And that part is very different than the current Palestinian Authority under which Palestinians live.
After the break, how did China get involved in the deal? So, Deanna, almost as significant as what is in this agreement is where it was signed. In recent years, we've seen China take more of a prominent role in Middle Eastern affairs. I mean, you had the Iran-Saudi rapprochement, for example. So I have two questions for you. What does China offer as a mediator that something like the EU or the US doesn't? And what's in it for China?
I think there's a few things. So first, why China and why not any other country? Because China is not clinging to this very false notion that somehow Palestinian factions can be maligned or can be ousted. Look, I want to step back. One of the things that the United States and that the European Union, European states have always been pushing is that Hamas can't be part of any governing Palestinian structure. And the reason that they've said this is they say, Hamas doesn't recognize Israel, Hamas hasn't renounced violence. And yet, if you look at Israel and what Israel has done, Israel has never recognized Palestine. In fact, they just passed a resolution last week saying that they will never recognize a Palestinian state. And they've never renounced violence. We already see that they're committing genocide and they're cheering it on. So China is looking at Palestinian politics as a whole, and they're saying you cannot simply oust one group. You cannot say that these don't represent Palestinians and that they should not. By going down that path, then we Palestinians should also have a right to say who is leading Israel. So that's China's approach. The other difference is that China has now been getting much more involved in the Middle East, particularly, as you already mentioned, with Saudi Arabia and Iran. And I think that what's in it for China is that China wants to see a much more stable region because it's also good for them as well. And where Europe has failed, and where the United States has not only failed, but has cheered on this genocidal regime, I think that China is providing a bit of a counterweight. It remains to be seen, of course, but the fact that they are getting involved says a lot about the United States, it says a lot about Europe, and it says a lot about the fact that neither the United States nor Europe can actually be anywhere near honest when it comes to Palestinians, because They have done nothing to hold Israel to account. They've been at the forefront of Israeli impunity.
Right. Okay, I want to dig a little bit deeper into what's going on in this agreement because it's still amazing to me, Deanna, how little discussion there is about what a post-war Gaza is going to look like.
Precisely. You've made a very important remark, which is that we just don't know what a post-genocide Gaza looks like. And there's a reason for that. Just this past week with the Israeli prime minister going to Congress, instead of him giving a vision for what Gaza is going to look like, instead of him saying how Israel is going to disentangle itself from Gaza.
No matter how long it takes, no matter how difficult the road ahead, Israel will not relent. Israel will not bend.
The only vision that he put forward was perpetual occupation.
The day after we defeat Hamas, a new Gaza can emerge. My vision for that day is of a demilitarized and de-radicalized Gaza.
And he wants to make life so difficult in Gaza that Palestinians leave. You know, I want you to step back and think about what Gaza looks like today. So Gaza City was the largest Palestinian city. It's been virtually flattened. There are practically no homes left in the northern part of the Gaza Strip. Gaza is the most densely populated place on earth. If you are a Palestinian and you require medical treatment, you're going to have to do so outside of Gaza because they bombed 30 of 36 hospitals. If you're a Palestinian and you want to get higher education, you're going to have to do so outside of Gaza because they've bombed all of the universities. And they killed off the teachers and the physicists and the doctors and the university professors. And that's the whole aim, is to make sure that Gaza is flattened, unlivable, and that people seek a life outside of Gaza. And so to get into this particular agreement, what this is talking about is envisioning a plan for Gaza that doesn't entail ethnic cleansing, that doesn't entail people seeking a life outside of Gaza, but instead entails a rebuilding of Gaza by Palestinians and not maligning or ousting any of the Palestinian factions. You can't do that. That's not the way that politics works. And so this is the reason why we see the importance of this agreement, is that it's not just about Hamas, it's not just about Fatah, but it's about Palestinian unity as a whole and about coming up with a vision for Gaza as soon as Israel stops its bombs. And this is the starting point, is that the bombs must stop.
Does it also signal that Palestinians aren't just willing to wait around for the U.S. and the Israelis to determine what their future is going to look like, that they have other potential allies in someone like China, and that how that might relate to this recent ICJ ruling that says definitively that Palestinians have a right to self-determination, even in the absence of a nation state?
Precisely. So the essence of self-determination is Palestinians determining their own future, being free and determining their own future. And what the United States and what Israel want to do is they want to put conditions on Palestinians. They want to be the ones to control Palestinian lives and control Palestinian futures. You're not going to be the ones who choose our leaders for us. We've been down that path before. We've tried it your way. And all that you've brought us is more settlements. You brought us more violence. You brought us more destruction. You brought us an entrenching of the occupation. This time, it's going to be different. What this means for China, for other countries as well, is that if the world believes in the system of rule of law, then countries must be held to standards. And if they violate those international standards, which Israel has through its war crimes and through genocide, then they will be held to account. So this time around, I'm certainly hoping that it's different. I do hope that the ICJ opinion gets implemented. Now, people say it's a non-binding decision. Correct. But that doesn't mean that they didn't lay down the law. And when the highest court lays down the law, it's up to countries around the world to listen to that court and to implement that court's decision.
So, Deanna, practically speaking, does it really matter to most Palestinians if it's the PA or Hamas who are going to rule over the Gaza Strip, considering what's happened to it?
Absolutely. What matters for Palestinians is less of the who and more of the what. And in terms of the who, I'm talking about the actual individuals. What they're more interested in seeing is that we get our freedom. And that's why it's so important for us to be going down the path of moving away from Oslo. It was supposed to be a peace process, but all it did was entrench the occupation. It's important for us to move away from that, move away from this notion that of endless negotiations, of being Israel's security subcontractor, and into a place where the focus is on ending Israeli impunity, where the focus is on rebuilding Gaza, and where the focus is on a path towards our liberation and freedom, rather than a path towards negotiations. So this actually really does matter. And that's why when you look at public opinion polls, Mahmoud Abbas is the current president. His people have a very low opinion of him, not only because he's been in office for far too many years. He was elected in 2005 for a 4-year term. He should have been out in 2009, and we haven't had elections since, but also because he just doesn't offer a vision for the future. He doesn't represent, and he doesn't offer a vision for the future. This agreement is going to be focused on offering a vision to the future. It's Palestinian-led, where Palestine is controlled by Palestinians, for Palestinians, without Israel's thumb, without Israel's boot, without Israel at all. We want to be free. We don't want to have even the slightest whiff of Israel or Israeli occupation any longer.
And that's The Take. This episode was produced by Chloe K. Lee, Ashish Malhotra, Manahil Naveed, and Veronique Eshaya, with Amy Walters, Duha Mosaad, and me, Kevin Hurton, in for Malika Bilal. It was edited by Noor Wazwaz. I'm your host, Kevin Hurton, in for Malika Bilal. Our sound designer is Alex Roldan. Alexandra Locke is The Take's executive producer, and Ney Alvarez is Al Jazeera's head of audio. We'll be back tomorrow.